Hello everybody and welcome to the Great Guild Wars 2 Countdown. There are only 6, or if you have pre-purchased, 3 days remaining until the launch of Guild Wars 2. Just 3 days, or 2 days and a certain amount of hours, which is pretty crazy to think of, so it won't be very long now till we're in-game. The footage in the background comes from Beedster, so thank you very much there. They've got a lot of SPVP stuff, so we'll put that up. Always good to watch. And there's been a fair bit of news. There wasn't a countdown yesterday. Instead, I spent 6 hours playing a stress test that was announced. Yes, so I'm pretty sure that will be the last stress test, by the way, guys. I don't think... I've had a couple of people, I swear to you, asking me, hey, when's the next stress test? I think we're done for stress tests now, since the launch is coming so closely. It was an interesting stress test because there were quite frequent messages from ArenaNet as you were playing, asking to test certain aspects of the game. SPVP was one of those aspects, which was pretty good considering that's what me and Mike were playing pretty much all night. But the other ones were like the trading post and like the gem store and stuff like that. I don't know how well the testing of that went or what they really needed, but whatever was going on, they did end up extending the stress test first by an hour, and then they were just like, right, it will go on for 1 more hour, and then they extended it again. So it actually went on 2 hours longer. I was half expecting it to go a bit further than that, but it didn't. So in the end, we had a 6-hour-long stress test. Somehow that makes me think that's another reason for why this could have been the end as well, like the final stress test, just because it was so much longer. But yeah, it was really cool. There were various changes and things, as I'm sure, unless you've been living under a rock, already know about. For example, we finally get to see the dances of the characters. Loads of people have come out doing music videos and stuff, and they're all big hits. It was a big... I quite like this because it was a big thing in Guild Wars 1 as well. If you look back, it's some of the biggest videos for Guild Wars 1, and back then you got to consider as well, YouTube was a bit smaller and stuff, and it wasn't so easy to get videos and stuff up online, but nearly all of the really prominent Guild Wars videos back then were dance videos, where you could go /dance and then put your little asterisks there, and you could get like 50 people together all dancing in sync to some song, which is really cool. And there's been a lot of fantastic ones that have already come out for Guild Wars 2. I think everyone's generally quite impressed with the dances. I know I am. The animation quality on a lot of them is just really, really good. It's a lot more than I expected. There's a lot more subtle movements and changes you can see in people's bodies as they're doing the dances that you just would never have seen in Guild Wars 1, at least, for example. It's so high quality. It's really good. And the dances themselves are also quite interesting. There will be one there that takes your fancy without a doubt. The way they've done it is not through professions, as I don't think many of us were expecting, but rather it's through races. So there's 10 different dances in the game because it's races and sex. So it's pretty cool, and that was a big change. Another change as well that I'm kind of toying with because I never filmed it. I heard towards the end of the stress test that some of the jumping puzzles that me and Mike have already covered, but the videos haven't gone out yet, have been significantly revamped and improved. So there's one in Lion's Arch, and I don't want to spoil too much, but it's called Troll's End, right? It's got a really interesting way to get to it, and there's not much jumping after that, or originally there wasn't much jumping after that. You just kind of travel along this thing, do a couple of pretty easy jumps, and then you'd be at the end. The real trick to the puzzle was finding your way in to start it, but apparently in this stress test, and I never saw, as I say, they've been totally revamped, and now it's like 3 times as long, and there's a lot of challenging stuff, and you can climb a lot higher, and it sounds really good, but I haven't actually filmed that, so I don't know whether I should hold off on this video now, because they're not that amazing, I've got to be honest, because they're such short puzzles in the first place. So I'm wondering if I should hold off and then at release go cover those, or what, as a part of the achievement series. Let me know what you guys think. Aside from that, I'm not sure what else other changes really there were in the stress test. Obviously there were usual trait changes and stuff like that, minor things, but aside from that, I'm not sure there was anything too massive. A lot of the achievements were rebalanced. There were a couple of new ones. I know there's another jumping puzzle achievement on there now, which is pretty cool. But yeah, so generally pretty good changes. One big change that you might have noticed that slowly crept up as all of the stress tests and betas have been going along is performance. And ArenaNet have actually released on their website now a post from a guy called Bill something who was talking about optimization with Guild Wars 2 and what they're expecting to get out of it, and kind of hard numbers and stuff. So you can go on there and you actually see a graph of different GPUs and what kind of frame rates they're getting, and they talk a lot about drivers as well and how important it is that the drivers you're using, because they do have quite a significant impact. In general, if performance is something you have been having an issue with, or you are still not entirely happy with the performance of Guild Wars 2 despite the kind of leaps and bounds it's made, you can check out this post because it will have more information there, and it will talk about their future plans, which is quite cool. So that's quite nice. Also, talking about the official website as well, one thing I wanted to throw in there, last time time, I mentioned that I wasn't quite sure what the source for the Pale Tree, for this song being about the Pale Tree from the Pale Tree. I wasn't sure what the source was. It's actually right there on the official website, on that news article about it. So that's where the source comes from. It is very much to do with the Pale Tree, and I think they actually talked about it in an interview recently as well. So very interesting, quite cool. Also, a bit of an update. I've had a couple of people, because I found this interesting, I've had a couple of people talk to me about this. You know, at Gamescom, they were giving away the codes for some unique item. That item is actually a shirt you can wear in-game that looks just like the shirts, or so it would seem, just like the shirts that ArenaNet usually wear at the conventions themselves. So like that white one, I guess, with like the red dragon and stuff on it, and it says ArenaNet. So that shirt, basically, it's a code you get that allows your character in-game to wear that, which is quite cool. I heard, actually, from one of my friends that apparently the reason why they changed the way they were being distributed, one of the reasons at least, was because a lot of people were getting the codes immediately and they're just selling them on eBay straight up and just being like, no, there you go, we're just going to sell it on eBay, which really kind of sucked. And I had another person tell me that when he originally went to the booth, it might have been after they kind of pulled it or whatever and said, we're not going to distribute it this way anymore. He was told that they were like out of codes, but after he had a really nice chat with them and kind of demonstrated he was a good fan of the game and so on, they ended up giving him one anyway, which is quite cool. So really, the codes are going to the hands, I guess. This is probably ArenaNet's idea, that the codes only go into the hands of people that are really passionate about the game and actually kind of deserve it, instead of arseholes that just go sell it on eBay straight away or don't really care. They're just there for a code because they know it might be worth something. So that's quite cool, and that's kind of a little bit of an update there for those of you who might not know, because I certainly only gathered this information from little places all around, so that was kind of what was going on with it. What else? I had a lot more to talk about, I think. Oh yes, I got my collector's edition the other day. Hell yes. I tweeted about it and said like an excited kid. It was pretty cool. I never really bought the collector's edition, too excited about the Ritlock statue. I've got to be honest, I wasn't too into it. But he is here now. It is pretty cool. The collector's edition comes with a lot of awesome stuff. I must say, my favourite item of it, though, is a book you get where the devs talk about various things. I've heard some interesting information from that book in regards to the Tengu and a playable race and so on. I haven't actually fully read it myself yet, though. I'm kind of tempted to go through it, read it, enjoy it, look at all the art and stuff like that, and then maybe make notes on some of the most interesting stuff I found and give you guys a summary at some point. But yeah, very cool. People are getting their collector's editions now. Quite exciting. Obviously, if you've ordered from Zavvi, you probably will, if you're in England that is, and you ordered from Zavvi, you've probably got an email about it that they've dispatched or whatever, but they are kind of flying around. So very nice gift there, and I'm sure we're all getting I'm certainly way more excited now that I've got my collector's edition. I really am. I think that's about it, really. Yesterday, obviously, I uploaded the new lore summary thing. I still get a lot of people ask about this. I am still doing it, definitely. It's just they take a while to put out. The newest one went out, and I thought what might be nice is if I got a lot of questions about interesting lore stuff that people thought about as a result of watching that video, and I thought I would address some of those. So that'll be what the questions are about for today. If you want more mechanicsy type stuff, you're not going to find it here. We're going to be more lore-ish today. So yeah, let's just get started on them. The first one is from Gimme the Gep Gun, who said, so why did the door of Kamali stay shut after the Lich was killed without anyone maintaining the soul batteries? Or were the Titans finished off with Abaddon and Malix's destruction, thus making the door irrelevant? There were really two things. This is a good question, and something I think it's interesting to go back and look at what people were saying about prophecies when prophecies alone came out, because that didn't make any sense in the story. It was like we had it established, oh, these soul batteries constantly need power to keep the door of Kamali shut, otherwise the Titans will be freed, and then we just kill all the Masat who were maintaining the soul batteries and then leave, pretty much. And then it's like, well, hold on, how long do these soul batteries last? If they last that long, then why were the Masat killing, or the White Mantle as it were, killing so many people to keep the soul batteries charged? It didn't really make much sense. I think the main reason, though, back then at least, was the Fire Island chain did erupt, or at least Abaddon's mouth did erupt. So that bloodstone that was there, the soul batteries that were there, the door itself, and potentially the portal too to the realm of torment will have been swallowed by it. I mean, we have no official law that says that these things were all destroyed and no longer in use because of the eruption, but I guess that was the assumption back then, that this is why we no longer needed to deal with the soul batteries, and it was because of this eruption, which really is a bit of a cop-out in the story, because then it's like, well, we didn't really plan or orchestrate that, it just happened and it was favourable for us, and yay, now we don't have to deal with it. So I think that might have been the idea. Whether an eruption of a volcano could have closed a portal to a different realm is questionable. I mean, I kind of get the image in my head here of the portal still being there but being under the lava, and then it's like, well, okay, if that happened, then what? Do the Titans still get to come out, because they're pretty much made of lava, as it would seem, at least while they're in the Fire Island chain? Couldn't they just swim out? So it's kind of vague and weird. But then when they released Nightfall, this was, in my mind, conclusively answered, and that's that we go in Nightfall. These are spoilers for Nightfall. I don't know whether I should really warn about that since it's such an old game now. But in Nightfall, we go into the Realm of Torment and we fight Abaddon himself. This is really the culmination of prophecies, factions, and Nightfall itself. It all kind of comes together here, really. I think of Guild Wars 1 as a story about Abaddon, and Guild Wars 2 as a story about the Elder Dragons, and Eye of the North kind of introduces us to that in Guild Wars 1. But anyway, at the end of Nightfall, we go into the Realm of Torment and we defeat Abaddon. We now have Cormyr, who transforms it into like the Redeemed Realm, as we'd heard it be called. And we even in the Domain of Anguish, the endgame stuff in Nightfall, we go to the other side of the portal specifically. We go to the Foundry of Failed Creation, where the Titans themselves were being created. And there you can see these creatures called Guardians of Kamali that are presumably manning the other side of the portal and keeping it active. And we go and kill all of those things. And this is obviously all just player assumption, but then I guess the idea is that now that Cormyr is in charge, and there's not all this crazy messed up stuff, as you mentioned here, we defeat Malix, the final general of Abaddon. From that point on, it doesn't matter that the portal's there, because there's no Titans to escape from it to threaten anyone in the first place. What I do like the idea of now, though, is that should we ever need to go and find Cormyr or the gods, for example, then we now know where we can go. We can go to the Fire Island chain, and there's actually a link to her realm herself right there on Tyria, similar to those links to the underworld that were laid by Lord Odrin in the Tomb of the Primeval Kings and so forth. So that's kind of the story there. It's, for a while, maybe Titans could have come back, but fortunately, after a few months or years, as it were, we then defeat Abaddon anyway, and it doesn't matter. So it's kind of cool. The next question's from Kale's Fury, who says, just a point of contention. Doesn't the factions storyline chronologically finish before prophecies? This is a good one. This is kind of weird. So at the end of my video, I say, oh, they receive an urgent message from Cantha, blah, blah, blah. There's actually, if you look at the timelines of it and specific references of when things were happening, these two stories do indeed overlap. They do overlap. The beginning of factions, if you're playing as a factions character, actually takes place probably around the same time as the main heroes are out in the Fire Island chain. There is an overlap there, but factions does not finish entirely before prophecies does. We know this because you can speak to Sin near the end of the game in factions. You can speak to her, I believe it's in the Raisu Palace mission. And I believe there's even a reference a little bit earlier than that as well, where she specifically mentions that she's already been on the Fire Island chain, so you know that the events of prophecies have ended before the events of factions end. But there is an overlap, and the way I kind of look at it, and I think it's quite solid, is that obviously there are different characters, right, in Tyria, and if you're playing as a new factions character, that first chapter of the story in factions while you're training in the monastery and you learn about the plague before you go to Kaineng City, all of that stuff is taking place at the same time, roughly, as all the stuff on the Fire Island chain. That's kind of my interpretation of how it happens. But there is an overlap, yeah, and both of these stories do take place essentially in the same year, at least parts of them do. But it certainly seems like the end of factions actually takes place in the year after the end of prophecies. Timing's always really weird, and you might have noticed in these videos that I've been putting out, I try my hardest to not reference how long ago something happened, and that's quite hard because, you know, there was a moment where I was writing that script and we were like at the Iron Mines of Molodune or whatever, we were trying to fight Marcus, and I mentioned Marcus, and I was playing for ages with, well, I need to remind people that this was the guy responsible of all the deaths at the Henge of Den Ravi, but do I say that that happened a few months ago? Because really, we don't know how long ago it did happen. We just have a general year time frame. We don't know how long it took the heroes to get from one mission to the next, so it's always a bit up in the air, but you have to interpret it in the way best you can. But I like that about factions and prophecies. I'd like to add, I like that they do kind of, in some regard, take place at the same time as one another. It's quite cool. I like what they did. Obviously, with Nightfall, then they jumped it forward a few years, and then with Eye of the North, they did the same. So you kind of lose that. But yeah, it's quite cool. The next question is from BV3709. What kind of a name is that? I am confused. Sorry, I am confused about Vizier Kilbron. So he was the Lich the whole time and was just in disguise. Maybe I misunderstood, but I would like help on this subject, please. Thank you. Oh, wouldn't we all like help on this subject? subject. This is something I had to leave deliberately ambiguous because the game leaves it ambiguous. Was Vizier Kelbron turned into a lich at the time of the Cataclysm? We don't know, really. It's up in the air. Was he always a lich, or was it a result of that turned him into a lich? Was it a result of his worship of Abaddon earlier on in the story that turned him into a lich, or what? We don't know. We really don't. And it's a bit of a shame because there's some interesting theories that are going on to do with Palawa Joko possibly being a champion of Zaitan's because he's like a lich and so forth. And you can kind of if we do assume that Vizier Kelbron turned into a lich from reading the Lost Scrolls, you can draw some parallels between, well, Zaitan, don't forget, the entire time through this story, whenever we're talking about ore, do not forget that deep beneath it, Zaitan is currently asleep. So when we have this lore of Vizier Kelbron knowing of dark magics deep beneath ore, it's very easy to draw that parallel and say, oh, maybe these are somehow tied to Zaitan. We know that the Elder Dragons emanate magic from where they sleep. The Asura built their central transfer chamber around Primordus just because of this. So there's a lot of ideas that maybe these Lost Scrolls are somehow to do with Zaitan, the thing that dragged ore down underneath the ground and killed everyone. You know, it was Zaitan's magic, and that's why he found it so easy to bring ore back up, perhaps. And if we do assume that, don't forget that Zaitan is the Elder Dragon of the undead, and then that would make sense that this is why Kelbron, the invoker of this scroll, turned into an undead lich himself. We also have in Eye of the North a story about another lich that has ties to ore, and there's all this kind of stuff to do with liches and ore, and obviously Zaitan's minions are the undead, and Palawa Joko's armies as well are undead, and there's a lot of cool ideas there, but it all kind of revolves on how do you become a lich in the Guild Wars universe. We have these parallels, but it's not entirely clear or established for us, so I couldn't say in the story. I had to be ambiguous. The main thing I have to try and do when I'm writing these things is, if there are questions like this that we have to ask ourselves, if there are points of contention, I'm trying to not come to my own answers, because that's speculation, that's not true, that's not canon. So I can't come to the answers, but I can present the story in the same way that ArenaNet have, hopefully, that makes you ask the questions for yourself and come to your own conclusions. And that happens a lot in Guild Wars lore, and that's because of gaps in the lore. And some people say that's shoddy storytelling, some people say it's good because it gives us stuff to discuss, and even in the real world we didn't know everything in times like those, so why should we know it all there? I'm kind of more in the latter camp. I like that we have things to discuss, but this is definitely one of those, so it's kind of up to you. We don't know how he became a lich, we really don't. There's nothing that ever said he turned into a lich when he read from this scroll, which is a shame. The next question is from Durka33, who says, correct me if I'm wrong, WP, but wasn't Doom the original god of death? I'm unsure if Doom was among the original 6, or if he was always the god of death around Tyria, but the lore definitely says that Grenth overthrew him and therefore had to be the original god of death. Maybe you can answer this in the next daily. Isn't this an interesting idea as well? Yeah, so it could indeed be that when we are talking about the 5 true gods, as it were, or the 6 gods that were shaping Tyria, the band wasn't the merry 5 true gods or the 6 true gods we have now, but it could have been quite significantly different. It could have been that instead of Grenth there, it was Doom that came to Tyria, and it was Doom that was shaping things and doing all that kind of stuff, and it was only more recently that Grenth overthrew him. We don't have a time frame for when Grenth did this, so it could be that the gods living in Ara were Doom, Abaddon, and then Dwayne, Balthazar, Melandri, so forth. But something else that's quite interesting, and I think we shouldn't forget, is when we hear of the gods living in Ara, the bit of lore that comes for that, the bit of lore that says that they lived there, actually only says 3 gods. It says Balthazar, Melandru, and Dwayne. It cites those as the 3 that live there. The others it doesn't mention. It doesn't mention Grenth. Now, does it not mention Grenth because back then when they wrote that lore, they knew that it was Doom really, but they didn't want to announce to us specifically the whole story with Doom and what was going on there? But then again, when the game first came out, they did announce who Doom was through the underworld. It's just we couldn't find him and it wasn't expanded on for a few years. So we can say maybe it was only those 3 gods that lived there. Whatever the case, now with the new Guild Wars 2 information coming out, it certainly does look like obviously there are temples to all the gods there, and maybe these 2 missing gods, Grenth and Lissa, were only sometimes in Ur and they went to other places. I mean, you can see out of all the gods as well, we have Grenth seemed to have quite an affinity and is quite well worshipped in the Ekovald Forest, and Lissa is quite well worshipped in Vabi. So a common theory is that you only have three gods really living full-time in Arar, and those other two were just in different places of Tyria. But there is this idea, maybe, that it was Doom as well that was living there, and Grenth was just kind of a nobody at that point until he overthrew Doom. You're not really asking this, but for people who don't know, the reason why Grenth overthrew Doom in the end was because Doom was very strict about his laws of resurrection, and Grenth basically didn't agree with that. Like, you couldn't resurrect, and death was something of a matter of permanence when it was under Doom, and he was a bit tyrannical, is the way that we interpret the story, and the way we get the story from Grenth anyway. But hey, history is written by the winners, so who knows what the real story was there. The last question is from Zora Diem, who said, I was looking through the Order of Whispers, and came across Chirai Ossa, the War Marshal of Elona. During Prophecies, he's called the Ghostly Hero, and compared to my character, he's huge. And with this in mind, him being huge, is it possible that Chirai Ossa is in fact a Norn? What are your thoughts about the speculation? I like the speculation, but it's a bit flimsy and it's a bit weak, to be honest. The main thing that I like about this idea that Chirai Ossa is... Obviously, let's just establish this straight away. When they first invented the Ghostly Hero in Prophecies, and they had this throwaway lore that he was Chirai Ossa, first of all, they never had the entire story of Chirai written out. For a fact, they didn't do that. They basically built Elona, the idea of Nightfall, when they were thinking of their next campaign. They basically built it out of that tiny bit of lore that they'd established in the Crystal Desert at the launch of the game. So none of that was really there in place. And certainly, it wasn't in place that the Ghostly Hero was a Norn. I mean, that was... If they ever did this, it would be something they'd retroactively go towards. But I will say that there's nothing wrong with the writers retroactively going back and making pieces fit together. I love it that they do that. They shouldn't feel unencouraged to do that, and it shouldn't be some criticism of their writing when they go back and make these connections that originally they hadn't envisaged. It doesn't matter what they originally envisaged, it just matters that everything's seamless and works nicely and takes you on some twists and turns along the way once it's all written out. So I don't care if they go back and turn Chirai Ossa into a Norn. I think that's totally cool and it would be awesome, even while understanding originally he wasn't in place to be that. The thing I like most about this theory that kind of does compel me to think maybe Arena had considered it, because surely they would have, is that after Eye of the North was released, they did the bonus mission pack, and one of the stories in the bonus mission pack was that of Chirai Ossa, and you got to play as Chirai Ossa. So the developers, obviously, they thought, right, okay, this was the first time we saw what Chirai Ossa looked like in life, okay? They had to think to themselves, what did this guy look like while he was alive? We have him in-game when he is a ghost, and we vaguely know what he looks like because of the way he looks as a ghost, and we have all of this story written about him and his tragic life and all this that was done in Nightfall. What does he look like? So they obviously looked at the ghost and saw that it was massive, and they could have easily just made him a normal-sized human. They could have easily just done that, and this was after Eye of the North, bear in mind, so they knew about the Norn. The Norn were already established in the story, and they knew what they wanted to do for Guild Wars 2, at least to a certain extent. So they had all of these pieces in place, and yet they still looked at Chirai Ossa, as big as he was, and then turned him into a character that is freaking massive. And they even pay attention to it. They draw attention to it in the mission itself, because you are Chirai Ossa, this massive guy, and you're running around with all of these other tiny troops that are alongside you that are Cornins from the same time as when Chirai Ossa was alive, and presumably of the same lineage of him, but he's so much bigger than them. They chose to keep him that big, and I'm sure when they did that, they will have been like, people are going to see this, doesn't he look like a Norn? But they stuck with their guns. So that to me makes me think, if they've considered it when they did that at that point, then maybe this is a direction they'd like to go in. Or maybe they just wanted to keep him big like that so that we would have this speculation about it, but they have no real plans to take the story any further. The thing is, the reason why I say it's a bit of a flimsy story is it's not really based on much. It's just based on how something looks. And I don't think a lot of theories that are just based on how something looks pay off that well. That's why I always kind of raise my eyebrows at, oh, here we compare the gods and the dragons together, because people usually just do it on colour. And when you just take something very superficial like that, well, I had someone say the other day that he quite liked the idea of the Tengu being very closely related to the Norn, and it was a reasonable theory, but one of the points that he was relying on was that the Norn in their eagle form look vaguely like Tengu. When it's superficial looks like that, I tend to be distanced a little bit, and that's one of the main things this theory has, just how Chirai looks. But the other thing that makes me not agree with it entirely is, so what if he's a Norn? Okay, let's say that he is a Norn. He's a Norn that somehow got to Elona and he just lived his life there, and it was because he was a Norn, he was so strong and independent, that's kind of how he rose to prominence, and maybe his lineage and stuff was some great lie, and there was this whole story about how he's this Norn that had escaped down, right? So what though? He's a Norn. How does that impact us now? How does that... It makes the story slightly more interesting for sure, but how does it impact stuff? How does it really add some new meaning to Chirai, or make him somehow more relevant than he already is? And I don't really think there is anything that adds that much. So it's a cool idea. I like the idea. I think it would make his story a bit more interesting, but just owing to what little it adds, I can't imagine the writers going back and adding that whole aspect to him in, unless there was something far more involved that went along with it, which of course is another idea that excites me. But now we're talking about speculation built on speculation, and there's a point where you're just writing your own stories, and really the discussion kind of stops there. So yeah, it's a cool theory, but those are kind of my thoughts on it. Anyway, there you go, guys. That's the Great Guild Wars 2 countdown for today, kind of Guild Wars 1 lore style special. And I guess I will see you tomorrow for another video. Thank you very much for watching.